Hi guys, and welcome back to another Apex Racing Academy setup tutorial video. This time we are in the brand new Dallara P217 LMP2 prototype car, and we're going to be trying to take you through everything you need to know to make some adjustments on this car to improve some setups that you may have been given. If you are an Academy member, you of course been given setups by our coaches, and this guide will let you sort of fine tune those to fit your driving style a bit more. But of course, if you're watching this on the iRacing forums, then it could be a mate setup that he's given you or something like that. And this is a way to basically have a bit of a dive into the setup and understand, what's kind of going on and perhaps how to fine tune it so the car just feels that little bit better for you. I will lead this video and just sort of say this is like a three-part video. We're going to be talking about the tyres and aero in this video, chassis next, and then the brakes and drivetrain in the final video. And there's going to be some real-world physics behind this video. So that may not always ring true with iRacing, but you never really know with the tyre models that what we're going to get. Things change very quickly, so a bit of broader knowledge might help you than just sort of saying, right, set your tire pressures here because that's what they need to be. As I'm recording this video, it's 2020 season 4, and most tire pressures are pretty low in the sim. Of course, that could change. Like, you could be watching this in 3 seasons time and they're in the mid range, or they're really a lot higher, so we just don't know. And this video will, if you can still use this video to try and understand where they need to be moving forwards. Right, let's jump into it then. So yeah, we're going to talk tires, and we're going to talk pressures, and we're going to talk cambers. The first thing I want to sort of say, there are advanced tools to help you in setting up like cambers and pressures and getting them absolutely zeroed in to perfection. Those tools are like VRS, Motec, Atlas. I'm not going to talk about them today. That's like an advanced sort of class. And, by all means, join the academy and grab me. And I can sit there and help you with, different workbooks and things like that, and really get the absolute set dialed into perfection for your driving style. More than happy to, more than happy to go through that. With this, it's going to be using the iRacing tools, or the tools that iRacing give us to do that. So what I would need to say is this last temperature. This is literally what it says it is. It's the last temperature that this area of the tire was at when you basically stop. So if you've done a big lockup when you stop, or a big slide, these temperatures will be really high. Some of the rears might be lower or something like that. What I'm basically getting at is it's not an average, and we need an average to understand what's going on with the car and the tires and how they're connected to the road. So this is as good as useless to us in terms of setting these things up. I really do hope at some point iRacing change this. It's there, but it's not great. We use the tread remaining. The tread remaining is an average. You can't not work that out as an average of how long you've been out on the circuit, unless well, even then, if you didn't change tires at a pit stop and things like that, it's not going to reset at that point. But certainly, like temperatures cool down, and that affects wear rates and things like that. But yeah, so if you just drive out of the pits, do 10 laps, come back in, that is a true average, and that is what we're going to use to determine the pressures that we should be in, after a new build or something like that. So let's say then we jump into a car. The first thing we need to do is we need to do more than 2 or 3 laps. We're not really going to see a pattern starting to emerge unless we do somewhere between 10. I would say 10 laps is probably about right. This will give us a much better idea of kind of what's going on, because we're not to the decimal place or anything like that. So we need to see a real good idea. So first thing we do, new build, jump in the car, take any set, whether it be the baseline or whatever, and we run those laps. We're going to look and see what these tread remaining figures are at. and that will kind of give us a clue into what we need to do to get the tire back into the optimal range. We're not worried about it being perfect at this point. We just want to go in the right direction. Do we need to go up? Do we need to go down? What do we need to do? Or do we stay where we are? So if we come off that 10-lap run and this middle temperature, for example, it doesn't matter which tire it is, I might just point at this one. If this middle wear rate is worn much, much more than these outside edges, then what that alludes to us is that the tire pressure is now too high. And we will need to lower our pressure so that the contact patch is more evenly distributed over the tire. So when we inflate the tire too much, what it will tend to do, instead of it being kind of flat on the top, it actually balloons ever so slightly. And that's why we get this extra wear in the middle. I mean, that was quite pronounced. We're talking very small amounts, but enough that it makes a difference in the wear, but perhaps not visually. And that will, so we can then know that we've overinflated the tire. And the next lot of 10 laps we do, we need to take some pressure out and try and see where we're at until we get a much more even wear rate between them. Now, of course, if the tire pressure was too low, what you will notice is that instantly after that 10-lap run is that the outside pressure wear will be significantly more than the middle, or sorry, not or, but as well will the inside will be slightly more worn. Now, inside is more affected by camber, so this is why I'm talking more about the outside edge. So if that's the case, this outside edge is much, like it's down to 70%, and this is only on it's on 80, for example. Then we know that we are typically dealing with a much underinflated tire. If, however, these two are equal, then what that tells me actually is the camber is wrong. We still need this this inside edge to also be more than this middle for it to be an underinflated tire. If that's the case, then we add some pressure to the tire and we go out again. Now, you should get an instant bit of feedback from iRacing. Tires are so important in iRacing in terms of like your lap time, or any race car, because it is the contact patch with the road. We're trying to get this contact patch as large as possible with all the setup parameters that we do, and to keep it connected to the road with our suspension and things like that, so that we can get as much grip and reduce our lap times. So you'll know when you do your next run if you've gone in the right direction, because your lap times will come down straight away. You'll start to see optimal sectors appear, things like that. So you know straight away that you're going in the right direction. So you do another 10 laps, you come back, you see, do you need to do it again? Yes, you do, or no, you don't. If you do, you drop the pressure down a bit more and you go again. And you're basically going to do that until you get to a point where you've adjusted it. Either you can't adjust any further, so you're at the lowest possible setting, but the last setup that you did change was still the quickest, or you start to see the lap time fall back off again. And then what you do is you revert back to where you were in terms of the optimal performance in the car in terms of pace, but also double checking this wear figure. You want the one that gets these three as close to possible as you can get, and that's kind of where you're gonna stop, and we're gonna look at cambers. I will cycle back to pressures in a second in terms of how you can fine tune them to help balance a car in different areas of the circuit once you've kind of got the basics of pressure and camber done. But moving on to camber, so what a camber does of the car, we're essentially, if we have zero camber, it's kind of flat on the ground when you're in the garage, sits like this, straight up in the air, and we've got this big contact patch. But the reason we have camber that effectively angles our tire, I mean, I know this looks like, a low rider or that kind of an angle or something like that. But that's, an example. is because when we go around a corner, we load the G-forces load up on the car rolls, and the wheel suddenly goes from this kind of an angle, it starts to straighten up and become straight. And what we want is we want to try and get the tire. I mean, if it was possible, we would want the tire to be dead straight, or as close to it, but still with just a tiny little angle this way, on every single corner of the circuit, whether it be a left-hander or right-hander. Always the outside tire is the one that's loaded, and that's what we would want. Now, that's not possible because we can only select one camber setting. And the higher a G-force load is, the more the car will roll over. The less the load is, the less it will roll over. So we will always be sacrificing some corner. We can never get this optimal camber unless you have like active suspension that can reduce the roll and things like that to give you the perfect contact patch at all times. So what we effectively want to do is we want to get the best average camber for our circuit, so that it's loaded up as best we can possibly get, so that the tire tread is gets we're looking for a nice even wear rate between the inside and the middle tread remaining on all of these tires. So these two, these two, these two, these two. And the reason we don't want the outside to be even as well is because we know if it's even, that means even during the straights we're running on it, and possibly actually the tire goes from being straight position to maybe even like this in some corners. So like the more high speed corners, it's now rolled over on itself. And if it ever does that, we no longer have gravity pushing into the tarmac. In fact, we actually slide across the tarmac, so we lose grip. So that's why we always want that. We want our maximum G-force corner to basically get us standing as close to upright as we can get. So all the other corners are more likely going to be on this even, still on this inside edge. So what we're trying to do with the cambers is we're trying to get on these 10-lap runs that we're doing a camber setting that gets these as close to possible to get them even. So we want, say, like we come off, we've got 95% here. Maybe this is 95% as well, or 96. And it's not until we get into the 70 or the 80s that we start to see disparity between the wear rates or something like that. So again, because we don't have the decimal places, so we will keep doing. So if, for example, if we see we know we've got the pressures right, because this is no longer higher, but if this inside edge is, the number is wearing much more now than this middle tire, but the outside edge is still higher than the middle, that alludes that the pressure is right, but the camber is now set too aggressively. So we've got too much camber on the car. You can see the default 4.5 and 3.5 on this Dallara. So it might be that we've just got too much camber now, and we need to back that setting off. So we may go to like try like a 4 or something like that, and then take the car out for a run again and see kind of if that makes a difference in terms of the wear here. So we want to try and get these as even as possible on the inside and the middle. So you do it for all 4 tires and try and get them close. Now, typically you're going to have symmetrical cambers left and right. If you don't, you'll induce what they call crossweight into the car. Trying to see where they have added that on this car. It's usually there. There it is right at the bottom, crossweight. We really want a 50% crossweight. This means the car is not balanced to turn one way more than another. So if it's under 50, it will prefer to turn left. If it's over 50, it will prefer to turn right. If it's straight, if it's 50-50, it will it will do each side evenly, and that's kind of why we want it to be even, so we're not dealing with weird physics on the car. Now, some circuits we might adjust around that, but again, that's a more high end class that we would sort of talk about with our academy members. So yeah, so we're effectively keep adjusting our cambers. So like I say, if this is too much, then we must come down, like we've done here, to 4, and then we're getting closer to these wear rates being the same. And you'll notice again in iRacing, lap times will get better. Now, what I will point out as well, getting the cambers spot on, left, inside and middle, will make a big difference to your long run pace. You can be aggressive with camber, and actually, you might find that qualifying setups respond better for really abusing the tires for 3 or 4 laps with really high cambers. But certainly, after the first sort of 10 laps, once the wear starts to kick into play, and tread remaining has an effect on our lap times, then all of a sudden having a 65% here and an 80% here, you are not going to be able to compete with someone that is on an 85 and an 80% here, because one, their car is going to be a little bit more balanced, but two, they're going to have more tread remaining, more grip available to them than you are, so their lap times are not going to fall off as much. So that's why it's important to get the lap times, the cambers evened out. It's more for long run pace over raw outright pace. And that's why a race setup needs to be built sort of doing longer runs rather than short little sprint, 1 or 2 laps. They can help you get you in the right direction, but they can't give you a really good race set. Um, if so, we obviously talked about if this higher figure was higher, this wear rate was, we wear more. If it's the other way around, we're still wearing more on this inside, but the outside is still higher than the inside. That still alludes the pressure is okay, but we still are burning more of this middle tire off. Then that kind of alludes to us that actually we are probably we're probably much more running on the middle of the tire more than we are the inside, or maybe even it's still coming over a little bit to running on this outside edge, and we don't want it to. Like, certainly, if this figure is equal to this, then that tells me that we are running on this outside edge far too much. So you've got to get it back over to this way. So you've got to add more camber to it so that these figures start to become a little bit more matched. Once you've done that, your cambers are going to be in a really good place. Your race pace over the whole race will be really good as well. So now, with any setup that you're given, you will have a different driving style to anybody else. You might be more aggressive on brakes in different places, more aggressive on certain corners. So you need to do these adjustments. You need to check and go, well, I think I can get this camber more in a line, you know, then, make the tweak, make that setting change, because it will only help you in the race. Just because some 7, 8, 9K driver, iRacing drivers, give you a setup, he will drive the car different to you. You need to make that change for your long run pace. You will be rewarded with quicker lap times at the end. So it's worth practicing, looking at that figure and going, do you know what? I can make a little adjustment here, and I think this is better. Do a test, do a back to back, see what the figures say. If you've got more tread remaining, then bonus. You have just found yourself some lap time at the end of the race. So, right. So with that in mind, now we've got the cambers and the pressures in an optimal place, and we've got these nice even wear rates on our inside and middle temperatures. There are some additional sort of fine tuning that we can do. If you are getting wheel spin out of slow speed, so let's talk turn 1 at Spa, the bus stop, for example, that might be causing you excessive wear where you don't want it to be. And that might be just because your pressures are still slightly too high. So what you can do is you can reduce the pressure down a little bit. That will give you more support in these acceleration zones, will produce less wheel spin. We'll have more tread remaining because we're not wheel spinning the tire, not causing excess heat. And you will find that you actually gain a little bit of time in these slow speed sections. Now, of course, that has an immediate counter in high speed sections because suddenly the car, you'll have less support in those high speeds. So cambers may be wrong, contact patch might have changed. You maybe need to do some tweaks again to the cambers, but actually, it might just be that you haven't got enough, there's not enough support from the tire itself with the pressure, and you might find that the high speed corners are just a little bit more tricky. So, if ever you change a pressure to help in a low speed section, say again, like I say, the bus stop and turn one, make sure your corners like poo on and the S's after that spar, you don't instantly lose time. So if you find time in optimals, but you're losing it in those other sectors, then you've kind of got to weigh up which is your best setup up as an average. You know, do you need that more supporting in the slow speed, or is it the high speed that you more? And actually, would you then benefit from a click up on the pressure to give yourself more support in those high speed sections, sacrificing perhaps the traction in those low speed sections because you're not losing quite so much time? So that's something to kind of keep in mind. So if you need more support in high speed corners, if you find you're struggling there, and your competitors pull away in those corners, maybe try a click of extra pressure all round just to give yourself a bit of support better support in high speed, or maybe it's the low speed and then you can come down on the pressures, and that will give you a little bit of extra support in those low speed sections of the circuit. Um, that was more sort of in terms of sort of middle off the corner. In terms of under braking and turning in, a high speed corner, again, the car's going to be more responsive if the pressures are slightly higher. So if they find that the car is a bit wallowy and takes a while to turn in, say, medium and high speed corners, again, that may be that you need a little bit more pressure on the front of the car. If it's the other way around, in terms of in the slow speed corners, you feel like you can't quite get enough grip to turn in on the slow speed corners, it may be that the pressures are too high and it's not braking very efficiently because of these high pressures, and that a slightly lower pressure would help and allow you to turn into the corner just a little bit better. So you can drop it down maybe 1 or 2 clicks, and readjust cambers to suit that. That's why we want this range ideally from iRacing. With this very low setting at the moment, we don't really have this range to play with. Um, so if it ever changes, so it's in the 160s, then you will be adjusting pressures up and down based on where you want the support on the circuit. Right, that pretty much covers everything in terms of tires. If you have any questions on that, like I say, post in the comments or in the forum or on Discord, and we will try and help you out the best we can. Let's move on over to aerodynamics. Now, the aero settings here, we've got aero settings and then we've got aero calculator. Now, you can change these settings here and think, it will change some figures here, and you think, oh, this is better, but this is a calculator. That's all it is. It doesn't actually change anything on the car. It's there to give us a clue of what we're doing with the car. So these ride height speed is not an adjustable setting that you can do to make a setup parameter change. If you change one of those and you go, oh, it's quicker now, well, it's a placebo, I'm afraid, because it's not done anything. But we are going to use this to figure out our aerodynamics. Right, so to move over to the aero settings, we have a couple of trims. We've got a low and we've got a standard. Now, typically, like your low downforce trims are going to be a very high speed circuit, so maybe Spa might be one of them. I haven't really done enough testing in the car yet to truly know like where that cutoff point will be. But yeah, Le Mans, Monza, these really high speed circuits you feel like are going to be a low downforce configuration. And the standard much more for your high speed or high downforce circuits. So like your Silverstones, your Watkins Glen, they're going to demand a high downforce setup because you want to carry more speed through these corners and things like that. Yeah, so there'll be some quick changes. Again, typically you're going to know fairly quickly what's going to be better. Just do a couple of laps. You'll know straight away which is gonna it is gonna respond better in terms of lap times. So with it on the standard, what we also then, so we have a rear wing angle, and we have which is basically yeah, so just the the wing angle at the back of the car, and then you have the number of dive planes. Now that is what sits at the front of the splitter. So that's affects your front downforce, where the rear does the rear. Then you have the wing gurney flaps. So that's again on the rear. And then you have the deck gurney setting as well, which is also um, which is also to do with the rear of the car. I was just checking it, just to make sure I wasn't chatting absolute rubbish. So yeah, so we have the one setting on the front, and then we have the 3 on the back. So what are our maximums? We've got a 17 for the max downforce at the front, and 12 is the minimum on the rear wing as well. So we haven't got a huge adjustment, but we've got some. So a lower wing angle, so 12 degrees, will shift the balance towards the front. So the car will turn much more when you have a 12 setting. It will also reduce drag in a straight line, so it will make the car go faster. So you would come down on your wing setting if you found the car was understeering. Now with aerodynamics, this is much more about a medium or high speed corner. You're not really going to affect the balance of a car on a low speed section of circuit. It's much more about the medium and high speed where the aero really comes into play. So if you were understeering and you were on a 15 wing, for example, then dropping down to 14 would give you just a bit more a bit more rotation through the whole corner, if anything. Now you've taken off downforce in as a total here, so you won't have as much downforce. So you might find that you actually understeer off the circuit in some corners now because you just don't have enough downforce to keep it on. And it's not so much about rotation. So keep that kind of in mind. Think like the kink at Road America. Suddenly, if you can't do that flat, it's because perhaps you haven't got enough downforce on the circuit. And giving yourself more rotation is not really what you want through there. So you might have to kind of go back to 15 to be able to stay flat out through there. Going up on this figure will give you less rotation. So if the car is oversteering like crazy, then you can add a bit of rear wing, and that will stabilize the car as well. I'll come to the downforce percentages in a moment and kind of explain it when we start talking about rake angles. But that's just your very initial raw what this wing will do for you. The number of dive planes, I think it's just 1 and 2. Yeah, it is. So 1 and 2. So you've basically got a lower amount of front downforce or a higher amount of front downforce. Obviously, more drag with a 2, but more turn and more downforce as well. So you shift that balance back towards the front of the car, so it will rotate through the corners a little bit better, but it will be slower in a straight line. So if it's oversteering while it's on a 2, then maybe you come down to 1, you'll get a bit of a better balance of the car, and you'll get a fast car in a straight line as well. The wing gurney flap you've got on and off, and that is essentially like just adding a bit more rear wing to the car as well. They tend to have an effect to the drag, and this is where we might start to look at the sort of drag efficiency, so the coefficient kind of here. I'm just trying to remember. LD that's also that. So that is downforce to drag ratio as well. So I think I use the downforce to drag ratio more than I do the drag coefficient. So for example, right now we have a downforce percentage on the car, so of 38.98%. So that's going to mean that we have got a much more understeery car than we have an oversteer. So if I take wing off the back, you'll see that figure goes up, so 40.4. So that's us now making the car bring in the balance less towards the rear. Still on the rear because it's 40% towards the front, but more to 60% towards the rear. So it's much more towards that. So we have a balance here that we want to play with. So let's just take, we'll go somewhere in the middle. So we'll stay 15. So we'll look at this 38.98%. Now, that's with the gurney flap on. So so 38, I need to, now unfortunately, I can't do this for you on the web, but I will take a little picture with my phone just so that I can remember what the percentages are when we want to review it back in a second. I managed to get my thumb in the picture. I did well. So if I take it off, you can see we've gone from a 38.98% to a 40.48. So we've changed quite dramatically our downforce percentage now. So our car will rotate much more in those medium and high speed corners. Our downforce to drag ratio, that has changed from 4.895 to 4.893. So there's very little difference in it, but it is still a difference. But let's say, for example, we were like, well, which is better, off or on? And this, well, let's find that out right now in this setting. So we want to try and get a 38.98% drag ratio, and I'm going the wrong way, and typical, I can't. So let me push that back on. We'll go to a 14, and we'll take another snap. This is, yeah, well, let's do it live, live in this video anyway, in terms of trying to work out whether we want to use the gurney flap or not. So now we're trying to look at this 4.93 and this 39.52%. So again, we take that off. Can we get back to a 39.52? No, we can't exactly, but we can get pretty close with a 39.28. Now, we have a downforce to drag ratio of 4.838. Supposed to what we had, which was 4.913. So we have lower downforce to drag ratio. And we actually want it the other way around. We want a higher setting. Yeah. So we want this number to be as high as we can possibly get it in terms of knowing that we're not producing more drag. So I think with the gurney flap off and the wing angle at a higher angle, we actually have a less efficient car now going through the air in terms of its downforce percentage. So we're much better to have the gurney flap on as opposed to off, and try and work our percentage there. Now, let me take another snippet and some good information for you, if I can do it. So we're back to, what did we say? We'll go 14. So we'll go back to that. And we'll take the deck gurney setting. Again, we've got an off and an on, and let's see how it changes. We go to 41.02. So not much of a change there. And the percentage has kind of gone down as well. So I think this is going to be even worse when we get it back to it. So can we get to... So again, we can get a 39.28, which is the closest that we can get to. And again, we're even lower now. We're a 4.818. So the deck gurney settings, you're going to want that on as well. That seems to be far more efficient in producing downforce than having those settings off and having the rear wings higher. So that angle just causes more drag than it does produce downforce. Let's take a quick look at the drive planes, the dive planes as well. So we go back to what our 14 setting, on and on, back to the 4.93 and 39.2. Yeah, okay. So we go to 2, we go up quite considerably on the percentage there, and I don't think we're ever going. I don't think we're going to get low enough. Going to get it back low enough. So 17 on and on. Absolutely, we are not going to get anywhere near low enough to find out whether or not this is more efficient or not. So, well, actually, let me start that off with that, and these off. We'll know whether or not dive plane is going to be a little bit better or not. So we are. Again, I'm just taking a picture of it to remind myself what it is on this setting. So we're 43.48 and a 4.906. So we put that on, and that goes to a 45.98. So we already know that the flaps are more efficient. So that's 43.48. Oh, we might be close. Yeah, so there we go. So the setting we had before was 43.48 against the drag ratio at 4.906. So ideally, we want to try and have the number of dive planes set to 1 as well. That's the most efficient in terms of producing downforce against drag. So a 1 dive plane will, even if we match it, will be so match these figures perfectly, will have more straight line speed and the same downforce as a 2, but with a higher, a higher wing, which we know anyway because we're putting on a bit of drag, but we are also getting extra downforce through the middle of the corner. So a 217, for example, will carry more speed through a corner, but it's not producing it as efficiently as perhaps a 114 or 112 may do. So unless you physically need extra downforce on the front of the car to help it turn, or a substantial amount more downforce, so a shorter track, I'm thinking a twin ring Motegi again, something like that, where you need extra grip, more downforce, then perhaps your optimal setting really needs to be like a 1 on the dive plane, and kind of work around there with your standard. So and that's how we can kind of use this Aero calculator to try and figure out what the best settings are. So I'm thinking right now, actually what they give us with the baseline is not bad in terms of, I think these are the kind of, should be our kind of go-to settings. But as we've seen in the past with like the F3, the Dallara F3, it responds much, much better to having insanely amounts more downforce on the car rather than it being drag efficient. And then in which case we will have to go up on 2 and come up on the wing to kind of balance the car back out. So let's also talk about the aerodynamic calculator in terms of figuring out your ride heights at speeds, and trying to balance out perhaps like a low downforce. So does iRacing have a low downforce? Oh, look, they have a Le Mans set. Nice. So let's have a quick look at this Le Mans then. So right now they have got a downforce balance of 40.48, which is similar to what we've been sort of messing around with. There's no gurney flap on it at the moment. And the wing is as low as possible. But they do have a deck gurney on there as well. Now, say for example, this car here is a bit more too oversteery still in some of the corners. Like you feel like there's not enough downforce on the back of the car. Now, what we can do, we're like, well, we don't really, it's Le Mans. We don't want to add wing at Le Mans. That is just going to slow us down. So what we could do is we could change the rear ride height of our car. Now, so you may have heard of it before. If you're playing with this car and you know it's an aero car, you've got to have heard of Rake Angle before. So that is the difference between your front and rear ride height. So at the moment, the ride height is 42.5 mil on the rear, and it's 45 mil on the front of the car. So it's actually sunk. It's almost like it's down at the back kind of thing. Now, um, as an example, what I'm going to do here, when you change the ride height of the car up, you will affect the aerodynamic balance of the car. And I haven't done it yet, so this will be an interesting test. In theory, when I click up on this rear ride height speed, I'm not making this adjustment on the car. I'm just trying to work out what it's going to do. You should see this percentage number increase. If it doesn't, I'm going to have to start the video all over again. Woohoo! Fortunately, it did. So, what we've now done is we've basically said in the calculator, well, actually, our car's now a millimeter higher at the rear. And that's adjusted our rake angle. Now, I was saying if the car's more sketchy, if this car's a bit sketchy, it's got too much oversteer, what can we do without changing the wing? Well, quite clearly, as we've now got more downforce balance towards the front, we don't want to increase the rear ride height. That's just making it worse. So what we need to do is we need to decrease the rear ride height to bring this number down. So what we can do is we can come to the rear of the car where it's 42.5 at the moment. Let's say, give it a couple of clicks here. Let's take it down a millimeter or as close to it as we can kind of get. We're not quite there. Come on, go. So 41.5. So 1.1 millimeter, we have dropped it down now. So essentially, we have kind of done that. That is not like changing it in the garage and changing it in the aero calculator is not a one-to-one because it is a ride height at speed. And of course, the different speeds you're going into a corner, you'll have different loads on the car. And so then the rear ride heights will be different. But we're kind of using this as a guide to kind of go, well, actually, I've dropped the rear ride height. I know I've taken a little bit of front downforce percentage off of the car, and let's go and give it another drive now. So what I've actually done, I will point out as well, one other thing is you notice how the downforce to drag ratio has improved as well because we've gone lower. So now we actually we have a more aerodynamically efficient car in terms of how much it's producing the downforce because we have dropped the rear end. So we're going to gain a tiny little bit of downforce efficiency than anything. So what that's going to mean is we're still producing the same level of downforce, but now we're going to be a little bit faster in a straight line. So not only have you adjusted your balance to be more favorable so it doesn't oversteer so much, you've got a more efficient car. So that will mean it's going to go faster in a straight line as well, which is an absolute win-win at Le Mans, for example. Of course, if the opposite was true, let's just say, let's just reload the Le Mans setup again and say, well, actually, we don't have enough turn in this car. We can't go down on the wing because it's already at its lowest possible setting. Obviously, we can go up on the dive plane, but that's such a huge change that the balance might be undrivable when you change that. 2% is a massive, 2.5% is a massive change in aerodynamic sort of balance there. So what we can do is we can say, well, okay, can we come down on the front percent of the car? We know that the front end is higher than the rear. We'll see in a moment if we're even allowed to. But yeah, we can see by coming down one mil, then we have actually added a little bit of downforce to the front of the car. That's like perhaps 0.2 of a mil. sorry, 0.2% that it changes. And we are not going to be talking big, massive amounts of difference here to really affect the aerodynamic balance. So okay, so fine. We know that. We'll keep that in mind. That maybe a 1 mil change will make a difference. So what we would then do is we come to um, our front end, and we want to make sure that we're changing the right thing. Torsion bar turns. So I need to make sure. There you go. I haven't looked at the torsion, but this is part 2 of the video, you see, and I haven't completely got studied up on there. So yeah, this is for the ride heights that we are going to adjust rather than the actual strength of them. So the torsion bar outer diameter is kind of like your spring equivalent to your spring stiffness, and this is adjusting your torsion bar length to be able to readjust ride heights. So we wanted to say we want to drop down 1 millimeter. So that's half on that side, and we'll do this side. So we've gone down, it was 45, we've gone down 0.7 of a mil. Another click is probably going to be a bit too much. So we're 1.4. Okay, well, let's maybe say we do 1.4 and we give it a little spin. Now what we know that we've done is that from here, we're somewhere in between this 38 and 39 figure in terms of what we've adjusted. It's not a true figure because these don't, like I say, these don't match our ride heights at speeds. And again, every corner is different, so you can't get a true figure of what this is. You can just kind of adjust it generally in your mind. Just go, right, I can. I know that I'm going to get just a tiny little bit more of a percentage. So 1 mil, 1.5 mil, going to help me out. And that's how you can increase more front downforce without going crazy by adding in the dive planes onto 2, which we know is less efficient anyway. So we can keep it on the most efficient setting, and we can adjust our downforce and adjust our balance of our car front and back. Now the same thing rings true with a high downforce setup as well. Let's just see if we can just whack the. Oh no, that's Daytona. Got fat fingers. So you can see here, high downforce, everything on 2. We've still got a 40% kind of like balance. But let's just say now that the car is understeering again or still. Well, what we can do, we've still got this 45 and 42. Let's just say, well, we're going to move it up 2 mil, so we can come up, or maybe 3, you know. And then what we can do is come in here. We know still that is going to give us an increase in downforce front to back, and we want the front higher. And well, in this case, it's not any more efficient. Yeah, so we're actually losing efficiency this time by going up on the rear end. So that's something to be mindful when we're in a more standard and a more aggressive aerodynamic profile. Just pumping up the rake is not necessarily going to help, you know. So in terms of efficiency, but it will help on your balance. So you can still come up using the offsets here. So we've gone 3 clicks there, 3 clicks there. We've got ourselves not quite a 1 mil. So let's try and go up a bit further. So we're now 43. So we're close to a mil. Now what we've got our ride height changed. Now what you can see is that actually the third spring deflection has gone into a non-valid point, and we may need to adjust back that setting. So there are multiple ways of adjusting the ride heights on the car because we have a third spring as well. So you don't always have to use these spring deflections. To do that, let me reload that setting, and we'll quickly show that we can add 2 mil to the ride height as well by using the third spring offset, I believe. So you can see it does it evenly. So that's a 0.5 mil. We'll just go 1 mil. That's done that. What do we want? 0.5. Can't remember now off the top of my ahead. But you can see the ride heights here going up. So we're now at 45 mil. So we've added rake to the car. We know it's a little bit less efficient because of the aero calculator, but we know that we have increased our front percentage downforce in total, so the car will rotate more. And that's kind of how you can do it there. So there's multiple ways you can do it with the third spring, as well as the shock deflection. But yeah, keep that in mind. If you change the shock deflection and it invalidates here, perhaps go to your third spring and do it with the third spring instead. It is interesting to see that they have brought in a limit as well, because what that means is that they're trying to prevent you from having the car unsprung on the third spring. Which is essentially like a heave spring, which means that the that is never being when this goes invalidated. They're trying to prevent you from getting to a point where the spring is not actually being touched on either end by the suspension sort of push rods, and so essentially it's not being used at all. You always want it engaged to some extent, and that's what iRacing basically preventing you from doing. They're preventing you from having a zero spring deflection. Now, we don't know this yet, but typically a spring deflection has an ideal, a preferred setting, and that's something that we will need to kind of work out. And you also want to take into consideration a let me just load this back in. A fuel, what the fuel will do in a run, where they put the fuel level 75. Okay, so yeah, we said when we changed the push rods, the springs offsets up a bit. We got to a point where it was invalid, wasn't it? Or close to. There we go. So really close to being invalid now. Now what we need to do is we don't ever want this to be red, whether it's in the garage or on the racetrack, because that means this third spring is just not in play. You know, it's a mechanical piece that helps the car. Suddenly it doesn't work. And this is definitely a suspension setting. I should not be going on this. We're talking about aero. But yeah, as we spotted it, let's drop this down and see if it has an effect. Bang, absolutely it does. So as your fuel comes out of the car, it's going to reduce this third spring deflection. It's not much. It was only 0.1. It was very small, but it's enough that iRacing have said that this is an invalid thing. And you are getting close to having it completely unsprung. And yeah, so we will basically want to adjust our spring deflection. Which way am I going? Wrong way. So that when the fuel is out of the car, we still stay valid and we're still using that third spring efficiently and not basically not having it not in use at all. Yeah, there we go. So we perhaps did it enough so that when we took the fuel at 1.1, it's very close. I've got 4.5 left in. So, oh, there we go. Absolutely perfect. So that's the setting you kind of want. You need to make sure that you're on 1.1 as a minimum so that you don't basically render this spring useless during the race run if you're going from full tank to an empty tank. Right, I think that's everything in terms of aero and tyres and cambers. If you have any questions, please post them in Discord, post them in the comments on this video or on the iRacing forum. Johan Half is your coach, either himself or myself. We will, terrible English, whatever, Alex. We'll come back and try and answer your questions as best we can. This is a very technical car, so I will say most of the responses are going to perhaps be restricted to our Academy members. But where we can help you, we will absolutely try and do that. We've done these videos for the community to try and help you guys out. But yeah, so thank you very much for spending the time to watch this one. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Until we meet again in part 2. Yeah, get ready for that one. That one's going to be a big one because there is so much to discuss on there. All right, thanks a lot. Catch you again.